Poland, autumn 1939. A country that only months earlier had lived with the hope of peace was now crushed between two totalitarian powers. On 1 September, the German invasion began, and within 2 weeks, the Red Army came from the east. The nation ceased to exist as a state. Chaos, fear, and uncertainty spread across the land. Witold Pilecki, an officer in the Polish army, watched as everything that had given meaning to his life, freedom, honor, homeland, disappeared. He refused to surrender. Together with a group of fellow officers, he joined the underground resistance that would later become known as the Home Army. In the first months of the occupation, German terror became a daily reality. Arrests, executions, disappearances. Poland was being turned into a landscape of fear. Pilecki realized that a new system of destruction was being born before his eyes, but no one yet knew its full scale. Rumors spoke of a new camp the Germans had built near the town of Auschwitz in the south. It was said to be a prison for Polish political inmates, but trains kept arriving, and few ever returned. No one understood what was truly happening behind the barbed wire. By late 1940, the underground badly needed intelligence. Resistance leaders searched for a way to penetrate this new camp and uncover its purpose. The idea of volunteering to be imprisoned there seemed insane. But Pilecki chose that very path. He believed that fighting blind was impossible, that one had to know the enemy's machinery of terror. For him, the mission was not only a military duty, but also a moral test. The preparations were carried out in total secrecy. Pilecki created a false identity. He would become Tomasz Szarafiński, an ordinary man in Warsaw caught in a German roundup. The operation began on the night of 19 September 1940. German soldiers surrounded a city block and began arresting men. Pilecki, already in the area, made no attempt to hide. He was beaten, detained, and sent to the Pilecki prison, where hundreds awaited deportation. Days later, he was loaded onto a train bound for Auschwitz. The journey was his first ordeal. The cars were packed tight, the air suffocating, water scarce. When the transport finally arrived beneath the iron sign reading Arbeit macht frei, Pilecki saw the place that would become synonymous with horror. He was stripped, given a striped uniform, and tattooed with a number 4,859. From that moment, his name ceased to exist. Inside the camp, survival was the first rule. Death, disease, and despair surrounded him. Yet Pilecki never forgot his mission. Within weeks, he began reaching out to other Polish inmates. From among them, he built a secret network, later called the Union of Military Organization. Its goals were to gather intelligence, offer mutual aid, sustain morale, and maintain contact with the outside world. The first reports, smuggled out through released prisoners and covert couriers, shocked the resistance. They described starvation, executions, epidemics, and unspeakable cruelty. But the world still doubted. Pilecki understood that only hard evidence could make others believe. In the freezing barracks of Auschwitz, surrounded by thousands stripped of identity, he preserved his resolve. Every day he observed, remembered, and recorded details, knowing his notes might one day serve as testimony no one could deny. Thus began his mission of voluntary descent into the heart of darkness to expose the truth of the Holocaust. His decision was unique in the history of the war. No spy before him had ever chosen imprisonment in a death camp as a means to gather intelligence. Witold Pilecki became a soldier, a witness, and a chronicler of the crimes that humanity struggled to comprehend. Autumn 1940 marked the beginning of a new stage in Witold Pilecki's mission. In a place ruled entirely by cruelty and fear, he had to remain invisible. Any mistake could mean death not only for him, but for everyone connected to him. Despite constant surveillance and informers, he began methodically building a secret structure within the camp. Its foundation was made up of men tested by war officers, doctors, teachers, engineers. What united them was not only their military discipline, but their loyalty to a homeland that now existed only in memory. Pilecki understood that the first goal was survival. Without survivors, there would be no witnesses, and without witnesses, there could be no truth. The Union of Military Organization focused initially on mutual support. Prisoners shared pieces of bread, warned each other of inspections, and helped the sick find work in less dangerous units. These gestures seemed small, but in Auschwitz, even a crumb of bread could save a life. Gradually, the network spread through dozens of barracks. Each cell worked independently, so that, in the event of discovery, the rest could continue. Pilecki applied his soldiers' discipline to build an underground system where death was constant and secrecy was survival. His purpose went far beyond endurance. He intended to deliver intelligence to the Polish resistance outside the camp. The first report left Auschwitz in late 1940 through a released prisoner posing as terminally ill. Once in Warsaw, the document was copied and forwarded to the Polish government in exile in London. It contained detailed descriptions of living conditions, executions, and early accounts of mass killings. At the time, these revelations seemed unbelievable. Even among the Allies, many dismissed them as exaggerations. Every day, the danger of exposure grew. The SS employed informants among the prisoners, and arrests were frequent. Several members of Pilecki's network were caught and executed, yet the organization endured. He changed methods of communication, rotated messengers, and altered records to protect his people. By 1941, the camp was transforming. Trains began arriving not only from Poland, but from across occupied Europe, Czechoslovakia, France, Austria, Holland. Increasingly, they carried Jewish families. Upon arrival, most were separated and vanished beyond restricted zones. Smoke from new buildings rose day and night, carrying a strange, heavy odor. Pilecki realized that Auschwitz was evolving into something unprecedented, an industrialized system of death. He gathered information patiently: the schedule of transports, the construction of new facilities, the names of SS officers in charge. Through civilian workers connected to the Polish underground, he managed to send tiny handwritten notes beyond the camp's fences. These messages, smuggled through secret channels, described conditions inside and the growing scale of killings. Amid this horror, Pilecki's network maintained its purpose. Members understood that their lives now had a single meaning to bear witness. They knew that the truth, if preserved, might one day awaken the conscience of the world. Pilecki himself never allowed despair to consume him. He watched friends die, but remained composed. His later writings from after the war show no outburst of emotion, only precise observation, the language of a man who turned documentation into resistance. By mid-1942, the Union of Military Organization included hundreds of prisoners. It became the only organized underground movement inside Auschwitz. There were plans for revolt, but Pilecki knew it would be suicidal without outside support. The priority remained intelligence. He continued to record everything he could, aware that even if he died, the reports might survive. In a place where human life had no value, he turned discipline and truth into his form of defiance. Thus, his secret work continued, a mission sustained by the fragile hope that someone, somewhere beyond the barbed wire, would believe. By early 1942, Witold Pilecki's mission had taken on a new and darker significance. His reports no longer focused only on the cruelty of camp life. They now contained the first concrete signs of systematic extermination. Trains kept arriving from across occupied Europe. The geography of the transports expanded. Czechoslovakia, France, Germany, Austria, the Netherlands. More and more of those who arrived were Jewish families. Upon entering the camp, the new arrivals were divided into groups. Only a small number were sent to the barracks. The rest disappeared beyond fenced-off areas. Prisoners whispered that they were being taken to a special resettlement zone, but no one ever saw them again. Pilecki observed the transformation of the camp's infrastructure. In the northern section, new buildings appeared, structures surrounded by barbed wire and guarded around the clock. Thick smoke rose from chimneys, and the heavy smell of burning flesh carried far across the fields. The inmates called it the place where people vanished. Pilecki understood that Auschwitz was no longer a concentration camp. It had become a factory of death. His reports grew more precise. He documented the arrival of transports, estimated the number of people deported, and noted which SS units managed the process. In his writings, the word extermination began to appear. He did not witness every detail, but the pattern was unmistakable. Thousands arrived, none returned. In the spring of 1942, Pilecki established a more reliable channel of communication with the outside world. Through civilian workers linked to the Polish underground, he sent one of his most important reports. It contained information about new furnaces, about the use of gas, and about the transformation of Auschwitz into a center of mass murder. This was one of the first detailed accounts of the Holocaust to leave the camp. Outside, few could believe such a story. The scale seemed impossible. Even within the Polish resistance, some doubted the accuracy of the reports. Pilecki knew he needed irrefutable proof. He instructed members of his network to record every possible fact: names, dates, transport numbers, the organization of SS units. Within the camp, an improvised archive began to form, later confirmed by post-war investigations. Meanwhile, the daily terror continued. Disease, starvation, and exhaustion killed hundreds each day. Yet these deaths were only a fraction of the larger machinery of annihilation that now defined Auschwitz. Pilecki understood that his task had moved beyond military intelligence. He had become a witness to a crime against humanity. Despite his own sickness and weakness, he persisted. In his later reports, he described how prisoners lost the sense of time, how the line between life and death disappeared. His words remained unemotional, the language of a chronicler determined to leave behind a record that would outlast him. The organization he had founded now served as both an intelligence source and a symbol of defiance. The men and women within it knew they would likely die, yet continued to collect and transmit data. They believed that somewhere beyond the camp's fences, someone might read their messages and act. By late 1942, Pilecki's reports reached London. The Polish government in exile forwarded them to the Allies. But the response was slow and uncertain. The world still hesitated to believe. Pilecki, unaware of this indifference, continued to prepare more reports, convinced that the truth could still provoke action, perhaps even a plan to liberate the camp. He lived surrounded by constant fear, yet fear did not control him. His strength lay in discipline and his faith in the moral power of truth. Auschwitz had become the symbol of humanity's collapse. But within its fences, one man still fought to preserve clarity and reason. Even if he were to die, Pilecki believed his reports would remain a written proof of what the world refused to see. The winter of 1942 was brutal in Auschwitz. Frost deepened suffering, disease spread quickly, and mortality reached new heights. In these conditions, Witold Pilecki continued to maintain his underground network, which by then had become a sophisticated, multi-layered structure. Each member knew only fragments of the whole, ensuring the organization could survive arrests and executions. Despite constant losses, the Union of Military Organization continued its work, gathering information and helping prisoners stay alive. Yet Pilecki understood that his time inside could not last forever. The threat of exposure grew more imminent with every month. Several members of the network had been captured and interrogated. The SS had begun to suspect that an organized resistance existed within the camp. Pilecki saw that Auschwitz itself was changing. Security was tightening, new extermination zones were being constructed, and transports were arriving more frequently. He realized that if he did not escape soon to report his findings in person, All his gathered intelligence might die with him. The thought of escape first took shape in the spring of 1943. Everyone knew that fleeing Auschwitz was nearly impossible. Attempts had been made before, and almost all had ended in death. Still, Pilecki began to plan. His military training and calm precision guided every decision. He formed a small group of trusted men who had the physical strength and resolve to attempt the journey to freedom and reach the Polish resistance in Warsaw. Preparation took months. They needed civilian clothes, food, forged documents, and above all, a moment when the guards would be least vigilant. In a place where every movement was monitored, a single mistake would mean death for everyone involved. Pilecki studied patrol routes, guard rotations, and security blind spots. Nothing was left to chance. Meanwhile, his reports continued to leave the camp through smuggled channels, yet he sensed that the outside world still doubted. This realization strengthened his resolve. He believed that if he could reach Warsaw himself, if he could stand before the underground command and testify to what he had seen, perhaps the world would finally act. In April 1943, circumstances aligned. There was a small auxiliary work detail assigned to a grain mill on the camp's edge, near a less patrolled perimeter. Pilecki and two companions prepared for the night of 26-27, April 1943. The day unfolded as any other roll calls, labor, inspections. As evening fell, they waited for the changing of the guards. Using tools hidden in the workshop, they cut a hole through the back wall and slipped into the darkness. They ran through open fields, keeping to the shadows, guided by the stars. Behind them echoed shouts, dogs, and searchlights. Within hours, they had crossed the outer fence and vanished into the forest. Escape, however, was only the beginning. With no food and no shelter, the three fugitives traveled by night, avoiding roads and villages. Pilecki knew the Germans would launch an extensive manhunt. For several days, they hid in abandoned farmhouses, surviving on scraps until they reached contacts of the underground near Nowy Brzesko. From there, through a chain of safe houses, Pilecki made his way toward Warsaw. On 12 April 1943, after nearly 3 years of captivity, he returned to the Polish capital. For the first time, he could speak freely about what he had witnessed inside Auschwitz. His first debriefings and written reports, composed in those initial days of freedom, became some of the most significant documents of the Second World War. His mission had entered a new phase. He was no longer prisoner, 4,859. He was once again Captain Witold Pilecki of the Polish Army, a witness bearing the truth of a crime that defied comprehension. The spring of 1943 marked Witold Pilecki's return to a world that no longer resembled the one he had left. Warsaw was still under occupation, its streets patrolled, its silence filled with tension. Life went on, but beneath the surface, the city was restless and haunted. Having escaped from Auschwitz, Pilecki re-entered the network of the underground resistance. He carried not only reports, but the memory of thousands who could no longer speak for themselves. Within days of his arrival, he met with representatives of the Home Army. His physical condition and calm precision left no doubt that he had survived something extraordinary. He immediately began writing a series of detailed reports, documents that described Auschwitz with military accuracy, the camp's layout, its divisions, its command hierarchy, and its killing methods. He included data on the use of gas, the transports arriving from all over Europe, the executions, and the medical experiments. These reports became some of the earliest systematic accounts of the Holocaust. To the resistance, they were more than intelligence, they were moral evidence. They dispelled any illusion that Auschwitz was merely a prison. It was, unmistakably, a center of organized extermination. Over the following weeks, the documents were copied and sent through secret channels to the Polish government in exile. One copy was destined for London, another for intermediaries in Switzerland, where it might reach international organizations. Pilecki was aware that every word had to be verified. Any error could cast doubt on the entire message. His tone remained factual and restrained. Figures, timelines, and observations without emotion. Even so, the world reacted slowly. In London, his reports were received, but absorbed into a broader web of wartime priorities, military strategy, diplomacy, and the logistics of the Allied campaign. The suffering of the camps remained secondary. Pilecki did not know this, yet he sensed the hesitation. He kept writing, supplementing his notes with testimonies from other escapees. At the same time, he began working on a daring plan, an armed operation to liberate Auschwitz. In his conception, the Home Army, supported by Allied forces, would strike suddenly, overrun the guards, and free the prisoners, who could then join partisan units in the nearby forests. It was a bold idea, but it required coordination and resources that the resistance did not possess. The proposal was sent to the Home Army Command and then to London. The response came weeks later. The plan was deemed impossible. There were not enough men, weapons, or support from abroad. Pilecki received the decision with resignation, but continued his work. He believed that silence was more dangerous than defeat. His duty was to testify, even if no one was ready to act. Meanwhile, Warsaw itself was preparing for battle. The underground expanded, stockpiling arms, training fighters, and building communication lines. Pilecki became part of these efforts, training recruits and organizing intelligence. Within the movement, his name became a quiet legend. Few knew the details of his mission, but all understood he was the man who had entered Auschwitz by choice and returned alive. By the autumn of 1943, he completed his most comprehensive document, later known as the Witold Report. It combined everything he had observed: statistics, command structures, transport routes, and the mechanisms of murder. It was a complete record of a place built for death. Exhausted but determined, he did not stop. He continued to serve as a liaison, to write, to coordinate. His battlefield had changed, but his purpose remained the same: to confront ignorance with truth. He believed that truth mattered, even when ignored, that bearing witness was itself a form of resistance. For Pilecki, the war was no longer about victory on the battlefield. It was about ensuring that no one could ever again say, "We did not know." The summer of 1944 became a turning point for the Polish underground. After 5 years of occupation, the Home Army decided to rise against the Germans. Witold Pilecki, now living under the alias Roman Jezierski, was among those preparing for the long-awaited rebellion. The Red Army was advancing from the east, the German forces were retreating, and many Poles believed that history had finally opened a narrow window for freedom. On 1 August 1944, the Warsaw Uprising began. Across the city, units of the Home Army attacked German garrisons and communication centers. Poorly armed but well organized, the resistance fought to reclaim its capital. Pilecki took command of a detachment in the area around Napoleon Square. He organized defense points, managed supplies, and oversaw the evacuation of civilians from active combat zones. His experience as an officer and his unshakable discipline made him one of the most capable organizers in his sector. For weeks, the city turned into a battlefield. German artillery and aircraft pounded entire districts into rubble. Every house became a fortress, every street a front line. Pilecki coordinated movements between units, issued field reports, and maintained order under conditions that bordered on chaos. From the beginning, it was clear that the uprising faced overwhelming odds. The Allies could offer little direct assistance. On the eastern bank of the Vistula River, Soviet forces halted their advance and watched. Inside Warsaw, shortages of ammunition, food, and medicine became critical. Pilecki helped organize aid stations and distribution of remaining supplies. His time in Auschwitz had taught him to measure life in fragments, a crust of bread, a sip of water, an hour of rest. As the weeks passed, the situation deteriorated. German reinforcements arrived, and their counteroffensive was merciless. Civilians were killed in mass reprisals. Entire neighborhoods burned. Still, the insurgents fought on. Pilecki's calm leadership helped maintain morale when defeat seemed inevitable. To him, the uprising was more than a battle for territory. It was a declaration that Poland still existed, even if crushed beneath ruins. By September, the resistance was running out of strength. German forces pushed deeper into the surviving districts, cutting communication lines between sectors. The Home Army's command tried to negotiate for the safety of civilians, but the enemy pressed forward with systematic destruction. Pilecki and his men covered retreats, secured escape routes, and escorted wounded fighters out of collapsing positions. His composure under fire earned him respect among soldiers and civilians alike. On 2 October 1944, after 63 days of combat, the Home Army capitulated. Warsaw was destroyed. More than 200,000 people were dead, and the city was reduced to ash and stone. The surviving fighters, including Pilecki, were taken prisoner and sent to German camps for officers. Pilecki found himself in Murnau, in southern Germany. After Auschwitz, this captivity felt almost unreal. There were no executions, no gas chambers, only waiting for the end. In May 1945, with Germany's surrender, the camp was liberated by American forces. For the first time in years, Pilecki was free again. But the world around him had changed beyond recognition. Poland was no longer under German occupation, yet its independence had vanished once more, this time under Soviet control. For the survivors of the Home Army, the new order brought uncertainty and danger. Many were arrested, silenced, or forced into exile. Pilecki knew his struggle was not over. A new kind of occupation had begun, and once again, he would be called to serve not with weapons, but with the same loyalty to truth and freedom that had guided him since the first day of the war. The spring of 1945 brought the long-awaited end of the war in Europe. But for Witold Pilecki, it did not bring peace. The world he had fought for no longer existed. Poland, though freed from German occupation, was now under Soviet influence. A new government, supported by Moscow, took control, and for the veterans of the Home Army, this marked the beginning of another struggle, silent, invisible, and dangerous. After being liberated from the Murnau prisoner of war camp, Pilecki did not immediately return home. He knew that former resistance fighters were being arrested, interrogated, or executed. For a time, he remained in Italy, where Polish units were regrouping under Allied command. There, he helped compile reports on the Home Army's wartime operations, documenting the uprising and the fate of prisoners who had not returned. Despite exhaustion and poor health, he could not remain on the sidelines. In late 1945, driven by duty, he decided to return to Poland. Using false documents, he crossed the border illegally. His mission was to gather intelligence on the new communist authorities and pass that information to the Polish exile leadership in the West. When he reached Warsaw, he found a city almost erased from the map. The ruins of streets and squares where he had once fought were now covered in debris. People tried to rebuild their lives amid the destruction, but fear was everywhere. The newly formed security service had infiltrated every institution. The former soldiers of the underground lived in hiding, uncertain whom they could trust. Pilecki assumed a new identity and began work as an ordinary clerk, while secretly rebuilding a small network of contacts. His group collected information about arrests, deportations, and political trials. They also gathered testimonies about Poles who had been sent to Soviet camps. The work was conducted with utmost secrecy, but every move carried risk. By 1947, his network extended to several Polish cities. Reports were smuggled out through couriers to Italy, where the Polish emigration maintained contact with Western intelligence. Then came a fatal breach. One courier was arrested and forced to talk. The secret police traced the connections back to Warsaw. In May 1947, Witold Pilecki was arrested by agents of the Ministry of Public Security. He was taken to Mokotów prison, the same building where so many resistance fighters had been interrogated. His captors accused him of espionage, conspiracy, and collaboration with foreign powers. The interrogations lasted for months. He was beaten, deprived of sleep, and subjected to psychological torture. Despite this, he gave no names. His interrogators noted his composure and dignity, even under the harshest treatment. In the spring of 1948, a closed military trial was held. The outcome was predetermined. He was sentenced to death. In his final written statement, Pilecki expressed no regret. He wrote that he had acted solely in the service of his country and in defense of truth. On 25 May 1948, the sentence was carried out. His body was buried secretly in an unmarked grave. For decades, his resting place remained unknown. His name was erased from public memory, and his family was forbidden to speak of him. For nearly half a century, the story of Witold Pilecki survived only in whispers passed between former soldiers, preserved in fragments of letters, hidden in exile archives. Officially, he did not exist. Unofficially, he remained one of the most courageous men of his generation, the soldier who had entered Auschwitz voluntarily and continued to fight long after the war had supposedly ended. After Witold Pilecki's execution, his name was erased from public life. The new authorities of Communist Poland worked systematically to destroy his memory. In official records, he was labeled an enemy of the state. His reports and wartime service were buried in secret archives. Those who knew the truth were forced into silence. His family lived under constant scrutiny, his children growing up forbidden to speak of their father. The years of silence stretched into decades. But history cannot be completely erased. Copies of his wartime reports and intelligence notes survived in exile archives in London, in Rome, in private collections kept by members of the Polish government in exile. These documents, written in a calm military tone, became some of the earliest eyewitness accounts of the Nazi extermination system in occupied Europe. In time, fragments of his story began to resurface. During the later years of communist rule, underground historians and former prisoners of Auschwitz whispered of an officer who had volunteered to enter the camp to uncover the truth. His name was rarely mentioned, but his legend grew. Among survivors, there were stories of a man who organized secret aid for the weak and who risked his life to send reports beyond the barbed wire. After 1989, when Poland regained its independence, the process of restoring historical justice began. The archives of the secret police were opened, and the files of the Pilecki case were examined for the first time in 40 years. Researchers uncovered evidence of his arrest, trial, and execution. In the 1990 seconds, the Polish government officially rehabilitated him, restoring his rank and decorations. He was recognized as one of the greatest heroes of the Polish resistance. In the following years, efforts began to locate his remains. Investigators from the Institute of National Remembrance searched mass graves at Warsaw's Mokotów Cemetery, where victims of Stalinist purges had been buried anonymously. In the early 2000s, evidence suggested that Pilecki's body lay among those unmarked graves on a section known as Łączka, the Little Meadow. His life and deeds gradually returned to public consciousness. Documentaries, academic studies, and biographies appeared. Schools were named after him. Memorial plaques and monuments were unveiled in Poland and abroad. Internationally, he came to be recognized as one of the bravest intelligence officers of the Second World War, the man who entered Auschwitz to expose the Holocaust. His reports remain among the most valuable historical documents of the era. They are precise, methodical, stripped of emotion. Yet beneath their restraint lies the moral weight of a witness who saw the machinery of death from within. Through his testimony, humanity received some of its earliest verified evidence of genocide years before the world was ready to believe. Today, Witold Pilecki stands as a symbol of moral courage and duty. His mission shows that a single individual, guided by conscience, can confront absolute evil. He never sought recognition or survival. His goal was truth. He proved that resistance can exist even in the darkest place imaginable, and that dignity can outlast terror. Schools, streets, and military units now bear his name. In 2013, he was posthumously awarded the Order of the White Eagle, Poland's highest honor. His life, once erased, became a part of the nation's conscience, a story of faith, sacrifice, and the triumph of integrity over fear. The memory of Witold Pilecki endures not as legend, but as responsibility. It reminds the living that freedom is fragile, and that truth must be protected even when the world refuses to hear it. His journey from soldier to prisoner, from witness to martyr, remains one of the clearest examples of what it means to defend humanity itself.